Hello everyone, I am Niveda, a PhD scholar from Vellore Institute of Technology, Vellore, Tamil Nadu, India. I am currently pursuing my PhD under the guidance of Dr. Calavanane, and the title of my paper is Imagined Futures and What Ifs Speculative Ecologies in Interactive Climate Fiction. So, the study explores the intersection of two things, that is, climate change storytelling and video game style interactive narratives. The presentation will include the problem that we set out to address, the theoretical framework, the two texts that were analyzed, and the discussion and what it means for the field. So, to begin with, the problem at hand is climate change. And as we all know, it is one of the defining crises of our time. The World Meteorological Organization has confirmed that rising temperatures, floods, droughts, and forest fires will all affect billions of people and for generations to come. The science is clear, but getting people to genuinely care about climate change is the challenge here. So that's where climate fiction or cli-fi comes in. Climate fiction is a literary response to anthropogenic climate change, and it is transgeneric in nature, meaning it draws from science fiction, literary fiction, dystopia, and thriller. So, the goal of climate fiction is to make climate change emotionally and cognitively accessible to turn a planetary abstraction into a human story. However, cli-fi also has certain limits. The empirical studies show mixed results in whether reading climate fiction actually provokes action in real life. And critics also point out that sometimes the climate fiction becomes form-like narratives, which are insufficient to grasp the systemic complexity and also has a tendency to lean on individual heroism rather than collective ecological thinking. So, that gap between climate fiction's potential and its limitations is the starting point of this research. So, the question becomes, what if we take climate storytelling beyond the linear novel? What if the reader does not just observe the story but actually participate in it? So that is exactly what interactive fiction or IF does. Interactive fiction is a form of digital storytelling where the story's direction depends on the choices the reader makes. So it includes branching pathways and then multiple possible endings, and the reader is positioned not as a passive observer but as an active participant. So they are called as interactor. Why does this matter for climate storytelling? And the reasons stand out. So, first, IF demands active participation, not passive reading. The reader slash player are inside the story making decisions. Second, it blurs the line between the reader and the protagonist. You don't just empathize with the character, but you also become responsible for their choices. And third, it is multimodal, which combines text, sound, images, and data to make climate change visible and felt. And fourth, crucially, it makes climate change embodied rather than statistical. So, the abstract concepts such as biodiversity collapse or resource depletion become real because the reader or player experiences the consequences in real time. So, this is what Espen Arseth calls as ergodic literature, meaning literature that requires non-trivial effort to navigate, foregrounding the reader's active role in constructing meaning. This participatory quality is, we argue, precisely what climate storytelling needs. So, the theoretical lens through which the texts were read are Dana Haraway's framework of multispecies relationality, specifically three concepts. The first is symbiosis, which means making together. So, Haraway uses this to describe systems that are produced and sustained collectively rather than in isolation. According to Haraway, there are no self-contained units. There are only webs of interdependence and co-production and co-evolution. This directly challenges human-centered narratives where one individual saves the day. And the second is making kin. So Haraway calls to extend our senses of ethical relationship and family beyond the human. Kin are not just biological relatives, kin are those with whom we share sustained and mutual obligations, which includes other species, ecosystems, and even technologies. The third is staying with the trouble. So, this is Haraway's refusal of easy solutions. She asks us to remain genuinely present to the ongoing ecological crisis, not retreating into technological optimism or apocalyptic despair, but inhabiting the uncertainty honestly and together. So, these three concepts give us what we call a framework of speculative ecologies, treating the imagined worlds of fiction as socio-natural systems where human and non-human actors, material infrastructures, and even narratives co-produce each other. So, when Haraway's framework is applied to interactive fiction, it reveals something completely new. So, IF does not just represent these ecological dynamics, but it enacts them structurally. So, the method of the study is a qualitative close reading of two climate themed interactive fiction works. The first is Esperanto, Hope Renewed, created by Loresa. It follows a protagonist named Amy. The reader or the player can choose the name of the protagonist and the gender. And so the researcher has chosen the name Amy, and she will be the protagonist. So Amy is a surveyor uh, in an experimental community called Esperanto, which is established after a catastrophe has melted Antarctica's ice. So the community practices rewilding and symbiotic living, and the reader navigates it through decision-based play. The second is Planet C by Mark Caro. Here, the player takes on the role of a colony manager on a new planet called Planet C, a colony of survivors from Earth devastated by climate change. The player must balance power, food production, pollution, and population in real time. So, both the texts were selected because climate change is the central theme, and both include multimodal elements, including images and sound, and both require the player to make meaningful ethical decisions about kin, community, and ecological responsibility. The analysis was informed throughout by Haraway's theoretical framework. So let me take you into the world of Esperanto. So the village of Esperanto is not just a backdrop, it is what Haraway calls a holobiont. That it is a living community where bees, fish, fungi, worms, mushrooms, and humans are completely interdependent. So each member of the community tends to their non-human kin. For instance, Melissa is the beekeeper, and old Nate cultivates worms and fish, and he is in charge of the crops. And Maiko grows mushrooms, and he also develops fungal networks. So, when a crisis emerges, that is in the form of an invasive fungus, which is introduced through Amy's field journal, it spreads through the mycorrhizal network Myco designed. And Nate's aquaponic pipes carry the blight to the crops. And Melissa's bees try to signal distress, but she doesn't know how to read the warning. Here, nothing fails alone. This is Haraway's insight made narrative. Nothing makes itself, and nothing collapses in isolation either. The resolution does not come through heroism or a technological fix. It emerges when Amy notices the slime mold spreading pattern on her washcloth and brings it to Maiko's attention. An unexpected organism, the slime mold, creates a new equilibrium between the invasive fungus and the existing ecosystem. Bees grow stronger, worms become hardier, and crops flourish. This is symbiosis in action. collective making, distributed agency, and surprising co-evolution. No one person solves the problem. The system finds a new way of living with its trouble. What makes Esperanto particularly interesting is that Haraway's concept of tentacular thinking is not just a theme in the story, but it is embedded in the structure of the text itself. Tentacular thinking is Haraway's term for relational distributed way of knowing, following threads and connections rather than marching toward a single goal. So it refuses the lone hero narrative in favor of entanglement and multi-species collaboration. Esperanto enacts this on every level. The language is full of tentacular imagery such as spider webbing lines, mycelium tendrils, fungal forest, and tunnel systems that function like underground mycelial networks. The color palette shifts seasonally from lush summer greens to winter grays, making the non human climate an active, continuous presence in the narrative. Most importantly, the player navigates the game laterally, choosing which community member to visit, following threads rather than a fixed path. You move like mycelium, not a hero. The IF's branching structure doesn't just resemble tentacular thinking, but it structurally enacts it. The player or reader becomes, in Haraway's term, a tentacular knower. The characters in Esperanto, they don't just manage their non-human partners, they love them. Melissa calls her bees my babies. Nate knows his worms individually and grieves their loss as he would grieve a companion. And Maiko calls his mushrooms my guys. So these are not just sentimental gestures, they are in Haraway's framework, sustained, practiced obligations to specific non-human others. This is Odkin. Kin made through relationship and shared living, not through some biological connection. And the concept of responsibility, which is Haraway's term for ethical obligation to respond attentively within multi species relations, is also dramatized with precision. So, Melissa's confession is the most theoretically exact moment in the text. She says, they were warning me, something was amiss, I just didn't listen well enough. She had a relationship with her bees, but hadn't yet cultivated the attunement her kinship required. So, this is a failure of responsibility, not negligence, but an underdeveloped practice which could be, you know, uh, rectified. The recovery doesn't come from individual expertise. So Amy calls for a community dinner and they all sit together. And she also sits with Maiko throughout the night, even though they did not find an answer immediately. So the narrative system speaks directly to the player. Sometimes just being there is enough. So this is what Haraway also insists. Being there, being here in this ongoing ecological crisis is enough. We have to stay with the trouble. Now let's turn to Planet C, another interactive fiction by Mark Caro. So, if Esperanto enacts Haraway's concepts through its world building and ecological imagination, Planet C enacts them through its mechanics, through what you do as a player. So, in Planet C, the reader or player is Majnun, meaning the manager of a colony of Earth survivors on a new planet. Earth is already devastated by climate change. That's the irreversible backdrop. So the player or reader must manage power generation, food production, and pollution in real time, while at the same time landing colonist ships and navigating political mandates from the Ministry of Planetary Colonization. So the game unfolds through letters between Majnun and his wife Laila, who is still on Earth. So this epistolary form gives the game a human melancholy texture, but the mechanics are what really do the work. For example, when the player makes a poor choice, colonists die. And the ministry sends a formal letter placing Majnun's performance hashtag under consideration. Abstract climate data, resource scarcity, weather events, and pollution levels. become situated, personal, and responsible experience. So, here Janet Murray's concept of agency, which is the satisfying power to take meaningful action and see the results of your decisions, is extended here into genuine ethical weight. You chose this, so the consequences are yours. But Planet C is also where Haraway's framework reveals its most productive tensions. The game positions the player as a policymaker, a manager who can, in theory, fix the colony's problem through the right choices. And this creates a risk that Haraway herself would flag: the illusion of control. The stats based interface, the clear targets, and the ministry's performance metrics, all of this can position the player as a technocratic problem solver rather than a responsible ecological subject. This directly contradicts staying with the trouble. Haraway insists there are no easy solutions and no correct paths through ecological crisis. But Planet C's design can make it feel like there is. If you just optimize well enough, you can fix it. Similarly, the game's treatment of non-human life sits in tension with Haraway's vision. Animals arrive as food sources and trees are treated as carbon sinks. These are instrumental relationships. They are not making kin here. So this is closer to the Anthropocene logics which Haraway critiques than to her revision of Odkin and multispecies flourishing. And yet, this is important because the game doesn't endorse this frame. It reveals its limits by making you live within them. The deaths, the weather events, the rising pollution, or the game's way of showing that anthropocentric management is insufficient. Planet C is a straight off struggle between paradise, not a celebration of control. It is impossible to it is impossible to escape the ongoing crisis. So, Laila has to stay in Earth and stay with the trouble. And even though Majnun is in a new planet, he still has some hindrances to live there peacefully. Reading these two texts together through Haraway's framework reveals three specific contributions that interactive fiction makes to climate storytelling. The first is the transformation of staying with the trouble from a theme to an experience. A linear novel can depict a character who learns to inhabit uncertainty, but both Esperanto and Planet C position the player or reader inside that uncertainty without guarantees of resolution. Esperanto does it through its open, wandering narrative, and Planet C through its irreversible backdrop of Earth's collapse. You don't observe staying with the trouble, you do it. And the second is the shift from representational to procedural responsibility. In a novel, a character learns to respond to the non human world. We witness their growth. In Planet C, the player's choices directly produce deaths and weather events. Responsibility is not observed, it is practiced. And when it fails, you are held accountable. The third is the structural enactment of tentacular thinking, the branching, lateral navigation of both texts, following community members in Esperanto, managing interdependent systems in Planet C, refuses the single directed path of linear narrative. The player is not guided to a destination, they follow threads. This is not an analogy for tentacular thinking, it is tentacular thinking made playable. Even then, there are certain limitations, and interactive fiction often has this goal oriented mechanics that risk producing what scholars call goal fixation. That is, players are too absorbed in hitting targets rather than engaging ethically or concentrating on the theme of the narrative. So, and both texts emerge from Western Anglophone imaginaries. A wider, more diverse corpus of climate IF would deepen and challenge the framework. So, let me conclude with the common phrase in climate activism: there is no planet B. So Donna Haraway's philosophy is built exactly on this premise that staying with the trouble on this damaged, finite, and entangled earth is the only honest response to the ecological crisis. And what we have demonstrated is that climate themed interactive fiction does not contradict that demand, it rather enacts it. Through Esperanto and Planet C, we see that interactive fiction expands climate fiction's affective and epistemic reach in ways that linear narrative cannot. It transforms abstract knowledge into a situated and participatory experience. It positions the player or reader as a tentacular knower navigating ecological entanglement. It makes responsibility procedural, something you practice, not something you witness. And interactive fiction does not resolve the contradictions of the Anthropocene. It makes you live in them, and perhaps that is exactly what climate storytelling needs to do. So, this study contributes to environmental humanities and digital narrative studies and opens directions for future research. Obviously, the texts are from the Western corpus, therefore, the search could be widened, and an empirical reader response study could produce evidence based knowledge and a deeper formal analysis of how IF's algorithmic structures enable or foreclose multispecies thinking. As climate change continues to exceed the representational capacities of conventional narratives, interactive fiction offers not an escape from the trouble but a means of learning to stay with it. Thank you.